Compañeros, welcome to another edition of the SQL Data Partners Podcast. I am Carlos El Chacon, your host, and I am feeling a little vacation-y today. For those of you checking us out on YouTube, thanks for tuning in. So we are joined today. We have our co-hosts, Eugene Meininger.
Howdy.
And Kevin Fiesel.
Hello, and I just want to point out as well that when Carlos says he's in vacation mode, mentally he's already checked out.
I can't even remember what episode we're doing today, but my notes tell me it's episode 206. And we are happy today to be joined, and I've already asked forgiveness, Taurius, right? So Taurius Litvinavicius from Lithuania is here with us today. So welcome, Taurius.
Hello.
Now, can I be so bold as to go ahead and have you pronounce your name properly? Correctly.
Right.
I'll give it a shot. It's Taurius Litvinavicius, something like that.
There we go. Okay. So I have not had the opportunity to get to your part of the world. But we appreciate you making some time to come chat with us.
Well, thank you.
So ultimately, we got connected through Manning. They connected us, and you've done some trainings for them, which we'll get to in a second, right? But like we've already mentioned, you're in Lithuania. You've been doing lots of technology, instructing and consulting. And we have a couple of codes for your trainings on Manning. So compañeros, if you want to check that out, you find our conversation interesting and you want to get a little bit more detail, you can take a peek at SQLDataPartners.com/.net, DOTNET, or at SQLDataPartners.com/206. Now, we only have 5 codes for you this go round. So the first 5 in, and we won't publish this anywhere. So if you're listening on the podcast, and so sorry, YouTubers, if you're coming in through the podcast channel, this is the first you're hearing of it. You get first access. So you can head over to SQLDataPartners.com/.net. There'll be a way to put in your email address, and we'll send you the codes for that training. But ultimately, what we are talking about today is .NET Core interactions with SQL Server. Now, the number of questions I'm going to ask today, I think, are going to be fairly light. So let me start with one.
Carlos is going to be like, what's .NET? I've never...
What's a core? Is it like an Apple core? Should I throw it away?
Yeah. So I will give the first, hopefully it's a softball here. Why did you decide to put together a course on connecting to SQL Server?
Well, in general, I decided to make courses because I thought it was an opportunity to sort of not only to make money, but to kind of have an additional credential. You know, when you do a course, you won't always make that sort of money that you would want to make for your hours spent doing on it.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's also a credential, and it's a great one. You know, obviously, not all companies that you will work with will accept something like that. It's the same thing as a book. You know, I wrote books, self-published ones and one not self-published, and some people just don't care about that. They don't care about that. They're not interested. They want to see maybe a certification. You know, there are people like that.
Sure.
But in general, the idea was that the first course I actually did was on .NET Core API development. It was a bit more of a vast one, with lots of examples. It wasn't a particularly good one. This new course it's a newer version of that previous course. I wouldn't say the curriculum and the whole course in general wasn't good, but the sound quality was lacking. That was sort of the main problem of it. But by now I've done over 30 courses. Some of them are published somewhere. Nice. Some of them are unpublished at this point because, you know, I've done some on these new technologies that are now sort of expired. When you do something on a new technology, it's very, very quick. It goes out of production, the new version arrives, especially if something is in beta. You can't expect the course to live very long. It will die very soon, but sometimes you can catch on it and make some good money on it, on that very new technology. I did make lots of money on Blazor technology. This is the sort of new C# way of developing front-end applications. But getting back to that .NET Core API development, the very first course I did, actually, in the examples, I included the connecting to that SQL Server, to those databases in the .NET Core API. I think it's sort of a crucial thing. You have your front end, of course. It's kind of separate from the back end, from that API application, but API application is not really separate from the database. If you have an API, you probably have the database as well. There's no real escaping it. Of course, maybe there's some service, microservice going on, but usually it's a database, some way to get to the server, which is the API, and then insert it into the database. And that's all there is to it. So I did that, and I think most people will have that arrangement when developing an API.
I'm going to agree with you there, right? It's kind of the middleman, and so here I'm going to defer, right, to my better halves.
Sure. Well, so I guess a question that I have is, we're talking about using .NET Core to talk to SQL Server, but what specific I'm going to get the naming wrong, but like library or tooling or whatever are we talking about specifically, right? So I know back like 8 years ago, whenever I actually touched C#, I was using ADO.NET to do it, and I knew about Entity Framework, but I never did enough. So like, are we talking Entity Framework Core or something else, or what specific kind of tooling does your course cover for how to actually make that connection?
Well, I like to use the basic stuff. That would be probably what you would call ADO.NET.
Gotcha.
To me, it's sort of simple, basic way. You have everything laid out. You see your stored procedure, what parameters you put in. You have it all in one place.
Right.
Now, the other option these days, I would say, is that Entity Framework. It does exist, but I do believe it's just a bit overcomplicated. And I also believe the versions change a lot. I think the code that I wrote several years ago with that simple implementation, I could copy it, paste it in a new API, and it would work perfectly. I don't think the same would happen with that Entity Framework. And I also saw somewhere that people think it's quicker, more efficient, the Entity Framework. But I don't believe that's the case. It's sort of based on the ADO.NET, so it isn't really, something that you would get to be more efficient with your resources or whatever it is you have to look out for. But again, those two ways do exist, and maybe if you're into those third parties in your applications, you can go with the Entity Framework. But my advice would be to go with a simple, reliable solution that will work for years and years to come.
So it is interesting, right? I probably don't have to say too much, and I'm already breaking that. But the whole idea of like Entity Framework and it being faster. It seems like there's an inference there. Oh, well, it's easier for me to get it set up, so therefore it must be better, right? Like it must be faster.
I was setting up myself for a bit of a debate, but
Right.
There's no debate there. It's like, nope, I'm completely in agreement.
Yeah.
ADO.NET, I completely agree. It is going to be faster because anything you do on top of it will slow you down.
Right.
And Entity Framework, to its credit and also to its detriment, does a lot on top of it. So you can easily get yourself in a situation where performance is just awful compared to straight ADO.NET or a micro-ORM like a Dapper or a
Right.
F#.data.SQL client or something like that.
Right. So we're all in agreement, I see. I can't really.
Yeah, we'll have to try harder next time.
Yeah. So I do have a question about the whole .NET Core piece, right? So I'm gonna give my butchered recollection of the series of events that kind of led us to where we are, and then feel free to correct me with the actual facts. But my understanding was, back when the world was formed, we had .NET framework, and unfortunately, that ran on just Windows, and there was a lot of situations where it had gotten a bit bloated. It didn't fit in with maybe the kind of more npm node style of package management that they'd like to be able to do with NuGet. Instead, it's just this giant colossal framework. And with containers becoming a thing, it made sense to be able to run it on Linux. And so they kind of open sourced it, which even at that time was still a little bit of a shock, even though Microsoft has been going that direction, because there's so many things you're like, they're never going to open source that. Like Ballmer thought open source was just a cancer, literally, he said to that effect. And they open source it and they make it run on Linux, but the problem is that in a lot of ways they were starting over. They were starting with a much smaller API surface area so that they could have consistency across all devices, right? And my understanding is the whole idea with .NET Standard is basically like, okay, here's that API surface, and here's what we support. And if you target the standard as opposed to the .NET Framework or .NET Core or a specific Linux or Android phone or whatever. And my understanding is I think they're getting to the point where the numbers are about to sync up. And you can definitely correct me on that, but that they're like 3 something for .NET Core, and they're about to jump to 5, so that finally the two are going to be in sync. So do you feel that .NET Core is at a mature point? Because years ago when it just came out and when I actually knew more about C#, it seemed like it was still very immature and people were really nervous to put any production workloads on it. But do you feel like it's becoming more the standard now?
Yeah, well, .NET Core is fully prepared. I have no question about that. And I think, first of all, maybe I should explain a bit about or talk a bit about that .NET Standard thing.
Yeah.
Now, for the most part, you can use .NET Core. You can use that to build WPF applications, which is Windows applications. You can use that for API development, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can also use that for Blazor development, which allows you to develop front-end applications using C#. So it allows to do that, but it only allows, for the Blazor, it only allows the server-side Blazor, which basically the C# code runs on the server, and it's just the way to write it. It's nothing fancy. Now, the Blazor client side, which is the real new technology here, that is .NET Standard. Okay, .NET Standard, that one is. And, that is quite usable. There are a few things that are missing, but mostly because of the browser restrictions. But what I want to say here, .NET Standard on Blazor, that's the only real place I can think of where it is, that .NET Standard. I mean, you can write a library with it and you can apply it, but everything else will be something a bit more specific. It might be .NET Framework, .NET Core. You have something a bit different for, say, UWP applications. For Xamarin, it's completely different. It's a bit of a mess for Xamarin.
Yeah, I've been there.
I don't. Everyone can probably agree with that, but the .NET Standard is sort of the basic foundation of anything else you can add to it. But mainly, if you are looking to start with C# development, learn C# or just try it out, if you can do that. you should be looking at .NET Core. .NET Core 3.1. 3.1 today is the main technology.
Yeah, I mean, to use an analogy, that reminds me of the whole schism that happened with Python like a decade ago, where for those of you for the viewers who may not know, Python's an open source language, and they decided somewhere around like 2.3 or something like that they were going to make a breaking jump, right? They were going to make 3.0, and it wasn't going to support a lot of the old stuff. You weren't going to be able to just run your 2.3 code on 3.0. And they had library support to be able to you could import this library and they'd still have to make a change, but people, they dragged their feet, and it literally took a decade to get to the point where people were recommending start with Python 3, right? And so, I can imagine a similar situation that we've now arrived at where, here Taurius is telling us, if you're new, start with .NET Core. So that's really good to hear.
Yes, yes.
That actually brings up a question that I have, which is questioning that a little bit. And it is, when will .NET Core reach that tipping point where the assumption will be, let's start with core and only use framework as an exceptional case in corporate environments? I can understand if you want to learn C#, start with core today because that's the way forward. But do you have a feeling for when that might be the norm in the corporate world?
Well, I'm not really sure. I think what happens with corporations, maybe it's more with startups. You get some sort of lower level first developer. They want to maybe go with some very cool, very hip technology, lots of libraries, open source resources, and all that stuff. And they get into maybe some React.js, then Node.js as a backend, and things like that, and they maybe are a bit afraid of that C# thing, because it used to maybe be considered as a sort of, big corporation thing. But in general, .NET Core, whether it's 2.0 or 3.1 or whatever it is, it didn't really change that much unless you actually get into those deep things, always third-party integrations. There were a few changes, but if you keep your code basic, if you do it properly like that, with not too many third parties, you'll be good to go, and then you'll be able to move up to the next version quite easily. It won't really be a problem that way. And I do believe that's the thing that big corporations and even small corporations should consider. If you're going to use lots of third parties initially, maybe you'll save some time on that initial development. But what will happen next? You'll need to update everything bit by bit. You'll need to perhaps exclude something and get yourself another third party, or you need to write some additional piece of code that would support the other third parties. So I guess the moral of the story is don't use third parties as much as possible.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the integration process with SQL Server. In the .NET Framework world, we talked about ADO.NET or the System Data SQL Client Library. And in .NET Core, you mentioned we have ADO.NET through the Microsoft.data.SQL Client Library. If I have experience with the former, with the .NET Framework version, is there anything I want to keep an eye on or keep in mind if I migrate over to .NET Core and the new SQL Client Library?
I don't think so. I don't think there's anything specific. As long as you have your code as of basic arrangement, maybe if you get into some deeper stuff, there will be a difference, but I doubt there is a difference comparing those two. Again, that ADO.NET is sort of kept the same thing all the time. We don't really do too much to it. That library that you download does get the increments in the version, but other than that, I don't really notice any differences in when I update them. So it should all be fine, I think.
Okay. When it comes to integrating with SQL Server, what advice do you have around, say, query development? You know what, let me break it up into a bunch of parts, because that way it'll be easier for us to follow. First, stored procedures, yes or no?
Oh, definitely yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Carlos,
You can still stay on the show. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So you're a definite yes, and I think I know why, but I'm not the one being interviewed. So why do you recommend using stored procedures for storing queries?
First of all, because of the structure, you do have to store them somewhere. You're not just gonna write a piece of text somewhere in your C# code. What I prefer to do is do a project, of course, on Visual Studio, create a new, say, API project, right? And then I have a database. So I create a new database project that is actually possible. In Visual Studio, you can create database projects where you can create databases and you can create stored procedures, and then you simply click a few buttons if that works properly, and then you upload it as a database. You update the existing one, and you can also create a repository on Azure DevOps. So it's all in one place. It's all working sort of almost perfectly. And you can keep it very nice and clean, I think, of those stored procedures. Besides that, there's really no other place I can think of to put those queries in. Again, you're not going to have a piece of text laying around a string variable somewhere. Have some nice stored procedures. Have your database tables. Your databases as projects, and the code will be readable, it will be safe, and everything will be good.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And you also mentioned another thing that I was going to ask about, which is databases and source control. The obvious answer is there yes as well. So using Visual Studio projects, what are your experiences with those? I mean, what are the parts you like, you dislike? Maybe some pointers for people who might not have used them before?
Well, I really have nothing that I don't like about them. I mean, sure, maybe they shouldn't have those example pieces of code. Some of them have a bit too much. Like when I open a new Blazor project, I have to remove, I think, a couple of page files, maybe another file, and then some piece of code in several files. So it can be a bit tricky that way, but other than that, it's a great way to start your project. You don't need to really do anything. It saves probably hours of time. I had done some bit of Go programming. I didn't have to start a project, but then I did a little course on Go program language. So every little piece, it was so difficult. You have to create a new folder and do all that stuff. It's just so tedious. With Visual Studio, you just open a project, maybe remove a few bits and pieces and start coding. Start doing the work that you have to do, not creating some projects, doing some console interface thing and installing a bunch of stuff. Just one thing to install and open up a project and you're good to code, and that's it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what are some compelling reasons for database administrators to be interested in .NET Core?
Mm.
Like I can understand you're an application developer who's interested in .NET Core, or maybe you're a database developer who's a bit interested in .NET Core. But on the DBA side, are there any reasons why Carlos should be thinking about picking up that book on C# and learning a bit of Core?
Well, if you only have to prepare a database, maybe there's really no need to learn the language, the programming language that interacts with the database. But then, on the other hand, if you want to actually learn the language that interacts with your databases, C# would be the best thing to do. I have my SQL Server course, a sort of simple get started course, and I kind of wanted to show some of these options. So I think I tried to do C++, I tried to do Python, and obviously C#. But I did Python, it was terribly difficult. And then C++, I think I did, but I excluded it for some reason. But again, they are not directly compatible, shall we say. The opportunity is there to try it, but it's not one for taking. It's best to avoid, I think, it's all native. You go C#, that's a Microsoft product. You go SQL Server, that's a Microsoft product. It's all Microsoft, it's all under the same roof, and it kind of goes along together well. If you use another language, you will need to use a third-party software, a third-party library, whatever it may be called, and it will be a lot more difficult. So, you don't have to, I think, learn, but if you have to, if you want to, then C# would be the most sort of native option to go with.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And also, I'd add that the Carloses of the world do know or are learning PowerShell, which is another .NET language. And there are cases where PowerShell is a smoother experience than writing in C# or an F#. But there are other cases where trying to get, say, even something as simple as working with dates in PowerShell is a little bit excessive compared to what you would do in C#. They're still using the same date time library. It's just the manipulation is a bit weird. And there are other cases too where certain types of conditional logic are easier in PowerShell thanks to the pipe. Others are a little bit more difficult because you're feeling like you're bound to the pipe. And I would say that knowing C# or F# and working within .NET Core opens up some doors, even as a DBA, when you have to do repetitive operations.
That, or you can make a friend. Right? That'd be my. There's a reason we keep inviting you back, Kevin. Right? Just one of these days, going to be like, hey, I need this F# thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But your question,
that F# a real thing.
No, I mean, that sounds good. I mean, I feel like as somebody who, again, in a past life, in my last job, like 6 years ago, was writing, I was writing web forms code to basically slap a button in front of a stored procedure to give people in the company, the ability to do something in the database. It sounds like, if suddenly I decided that I hate Power BI and I'm going to start over as a developer, I could start working with .NET and talking to SQL Server, and a lot of the stuff that I learned 7 years ago is still relevant today. So that's really good to hear.
Yes, it is relevant, although the web forms, I think, they are gone now.
that's gone and dead. That didn't make the jump to core, but
yes.
MVC and Web API are still around. So yeah, no, web forms is long gone.
Long live Blazor.
right?
Yeah, Blaze is the new sort of a thing, a better one in my
The
opinion.
cool new
but-
kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Very good. And I'm going to pretend I don't know much about C# despite having 2 copies of Visual Studio Code open with Azure Functions and C# on the screen.
Right.
Let's just not.
So I guess last questions or last thoughts, Taurius?
Well, I really don't have anything to add, but I do have to say, I said don't use third parties, and really want to urge that advice. Try to avoid them, especially if you're using C# and that SQL Server arrangement. You really don't need that. Try to avoid that as much as possible. You will save time in the future. So that's my final advice.
There you go. Okay, should we do SQL Family?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so I know we've been talking a lot more on the application side, but our first question is, how'd you get started with SQL Server?
I'm not quite sure, but I do know I needed a database, some kind of a database, and I was into C# world at the time, so it just seemed like an obvious choice. You know, I didn't really consider anything else too much. You know, it's a premium product, it's a nice product, and why not? Plus, it goes alongside with C#, and you know, it's a good choice, I think.
There you go. The fates aligned, and you didn't have to stumble over some of the other the other environments out there. Okay, so now you come from a slightly different, I guess, background, right? We've talked about you being a technology, consultant. You've done some courses. Obviously, you do quite a bit of development. But what advice would you give for someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours?
Well, I think first of all, you really have to think about what you want to learn. Okay, what you will work is one thing, but what can you learn? What can you afford to learn? And really look into the opportunities that will follow after you learn that specific thing. Look at the job ads, look at all these different things. And if you are going with, say, programming language, some kind of a programming language, don't just go online and see which one has the most followers. You need to kind of go deeper, read those different opinions. If you see that something is great, say React.js is great, you can find lots of these opinions, but try to read the other ones, the opposite side of things. Just explore it all a bit deeper. I would advise people to do that. Because we have a lot of trendiness going on these days, and you can really get caught up in that, and then that stuff gets old and you have that piece of knowledge and it's utterly useless. So it's best to be careful and maybe go for something that's been around for ages. Say, of course, C# and C++, it's always a good choice. It's been around for ages and it will be around for ages. It will always be useful, but don't settle for some framework or for something very specific. That's not a good choice. It will be out and about in no time, and you'll just lose time learning something new.
Okay. Now, what's one thing that can make your day instantly better?
I'm not sure. I think maybe something actually working. When you start a call with someone, yeah, well, that, and even if you start a call with someone and sometimes the sound isn't there, something like that. So yeah, if it works, it's great. If it doesn't work, well, it's not a good day.
There you go. Makes sense. Now, I don't know what the exchange rate is, and you'll forgive me that I didn't look it up. So we're going to assume that you can do a translation in your head or a conversion in your head here. So you got $10,000, which we're assuming is US dollars. I'm not sure that would.
Euro.
There we go.
Right.
Carlos, to you.
Thank you,
Yeah, well,
Kevin.
that would be I think around 9,000 euros. Yes, these days. But yeah, I get the amount.
So what computer tech would you purchase?
Well, if I had nothing and if I had that amount, first of all, I would leave some money aside for subscription services. Because these days you can get a lot more for your money in these subscriptions, $10, $5, whatever it may be a month. You can get a lot more than just buying standalone software. But other than that, if I was a traveler, if I wanted to travel, I would buy a laptop and a proper computer, right? Unfortunately, I'm not a traveler, but I thought I would travel. So last year I bought a laptop. Now I have a laptop and a proper monitor connected to it. So I wouldn't advise that arrangement, but well, it works well. It's a strong one. So I will keep it for a bit. But again, if you are a traveler, buy a laptop. If you are not a traveler, I don't advise buying a laptop. They do get hot, they're hard to clean, and I don't believe they will last for as much time as a normal computer would. You know, I had my old computer for, I guess, 10 years now. So, you know, I mean, I did have to change the power supply unit, I think, and a few things, but it wasn't, you know, it still works. I don't use it, but it still works, and I could do some coding still, run programs. It would be fine, and it's 10 years old. So, you know, if you want something to last, buy a proper computer. And, you know, you'll be able to add a proper screen, big screen. You'll be able to move it somewhere to the side, to the front, and you'll have a decent distance from your eyes. That's an important thing, I think.
Sure.
You know, with laptop, you have to put your shoulders kind of together, and it's not the best stance, I believe, and it's not very healthy. So just buy a proper computer. It will last long and you will be healthier. So again, if I was a traveler, I would buy an additional laptop. If I wasn't, I would buy a decent computer, probably couple grand worth. I'm not sure if that means in the US anything at all. It's sort of, you know, if you don't know anything about computers and you need to do programming, right? Write decent programs, run those programs, especially sort of not just console applications, but if you're doing something visual, and especially if you're doing mobile development, what you want to buy is a gaming computer. If you can run the newest game, I don't know, and the newest game, I don't know them, I don't play them, but if you can run that, you'll be able to run your applications and your projects. So that's my little bias advice. But again, so it's a computer, it's keyboard, you know, maybe a comfortable chair. I don't think that's really necessary, but and it's not a really big expense. You know, I think people buy these expensive ones. They cost like $500, and you sit like in a racing car or something. I don't think you need that. You know, I sit on a sort of kitchen table chair, and I'm fine with that. But maybe
you
someone
say
needs
that, but then you have to sit there for 12 hours while you're gaming, right? And you know, and you'd be able to lean over, right, to you know, give yourself food or drink, and you know.
If you do gaming, then yeah, maybe it's a consideration, but not for me.
Okay, so what famous person would you most like to spend the day with? We normally say famous person in history, but it doesn't have to be necessarily a historical person.
Well, let's do historical, sort of. I'd say Dean Martin, because it's fun, you know, and everyone knows who he is, I would think.
Very good. Okay, so Taurius, our last question for you today. What is your favorite ice cream topping?
Okay, well, I'll have to disappoint you a bit. I don't really like ice cream, and it's not about the taste. It's not about the taste. I do these recordings, and I get on the phone a lot, and I do believe eating ice cream kind of damages my voice a bit, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose it, and that's why I don't really eat ice cream. I do, however, like one of those squishy ice creams where they come from this machine in a sort of a circle, and it's sort of soft ice cream. I have no clue what it's called, but
it's called soft serve. Soft serve.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't think it has a name, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff. Okay, so just that traditional ice cream, no toppings. Although, I know you said you're not traveling, but next time you get yourself to a Dairy Queen, try a dipped cone.
Okay.
There you go. Then let me
I'll
know.
remember that.
Okay, Taurius, well, welcome. I'm sorry. Thank you for being on our. Yeah, let's start again.
Recording, everybody.
I forgot to hit the record button.
Carlos actually lives in a Quentin Tarantino movie, so he always puts the beginning and the end.
Yes. Okay. So thanks for being with us today. Before we let you go, I do have a couple of shout outs I want to give. Let's see. We've got Eric at SQL 314, Arvind Shaman Sundar. Kevin, you're I did something wrong.
I'm shaking my head because he totally messed up Arvind's name.
Oh man. What did I say? Arvind? I didn't say Arvind?
You messed up his last name.
Oh.
Sundar.
Sorry, Arvind. You'll forgive me. I have a last name. I have a last name people get, and as does Taurius, have a last name that people mix up. Ahmad Bazi, Ash Dingra, Derek at Hezi Dog, Hezi
Dog.
Hezi Dog. There we go. And Roberto Fonseca. So
I have no complaint about that last one.
You know, every time I see that Fonseca, there is not so famous, I guess anymore, but a famous motorcyclist from Costa Rica, where my dad's from, Fonseca, who actually was in a bad accident and is now paralyzed. But I got to see him race once, and anyway, I always think of him. I digress. But thank you, Taurius, for being on the program.
That was great. Carlos on.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, we had a little network blip there. Thank you, compañeros, for tuning in. So now, oh boy, Taurius, you've got to be joking me.
Yeah, the video version, people are going to be like, "Oh no."
Oh, here's Carlos again.
All right, Carlos, quick, end the podcast while we still can.
I know, that's right. This is something that's not going on. Okay, so if you want to reach out to us, Taurius, how can people connect with you?
Over the LinkedIn, just type in my name if you can spell it, and
we'll have it on the show notes.
You'll find me. Oh yeah, that's good.
We'll make that link available on our show notes. Eugene?
You can find me on Twitter at SQLGene.
Kevin?
I just put my contact info in this Azure function, so if you know which one to call, you get it.
Okay, compañeros, before my connection goes out again, I am available at Carlos El Chacon on LinkedIn and other platforms. Thanks for everybody who's connecting. Just let us know you're listening to the podcast. We appreciate it, and I hope to see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.